Any chance to talk about books, I will do it. So that being said, we are back with another video talking about spooky book recommendations. And when I say spooky, I'm talking about paranormal activity, I'm talking about a thriller, I'm talking about something that might give you chills, something that might make you want to lock your doors at night. That's the vibe we are going for. All of these books I have read myself, and that's why I am recommending them to you. I always say this, but I would never recommend something I absolutely hate. But if I do dislike it in some way, I will express why that is, because someone might dislike a book and you might love it. At least that's happened to me quite a bit. So I don't ever want to say don't read something when you could potentially love that book. So I did organize this video a bit better this time. I'm going to be talking about adult first, YA second, and middle grade last. And that's the order we're gonna go in. So let's get started with the first book, because this is a long list. Grab a drink, get ready. The first book on this list is Let Him In by William Friend. I just finished this one, and it's about a father who is recently widowed, and he is now taking care of his 2 twin daughters. Ever since their mother has passed, they have been seeing this imaginary friend, and it's this older man, which is kind of weird for an imaginary friend, which is something they go into in the book. Normally, if you're a kid and you have an imaginary friend, actually, can you let me know if you had one growing up? I would love to know. But it's said that kids that have imaginary friends, it's normally someone of the same age at least. Them having an imaginary friend that is an adult male figure, kind of weird. And it starts getting very, very unsettling when this imaginary friend seems to be a bit more realistic than the dad would like. And that's sort of how the story unfolds, and it's very creepy. It's the perfect book to read around this time of year, or just in general. I really enjoy spooky books, but I thought this one was great. It kind of reminded me of Sinister. Is that the movie? The next book is You by Caroline Kepnes. Now you might know You because of the show, but what you probably didn't know is it's based off of a book series. And don't worry, I just found this out myself. This is a suspenseful psychological thriller that is rooted around manipulation and gaslighting. This follows a psychopath, stalker, serial killer named Joe Goldberg, who is obsessed with books, and he's also obsessed with people. He gets really fixated on certain people in his life. It could be a stranger, it could be someone he knows. And what this book ends up describing is him becoming fixated on someone, and how social media ends up helping him become intertwined in her life, because he's able to find out where she's posting from, the things that she's interested in, her friends, where she gets her hair done, where she lives. It's really the worst case scenario of what social media could potentially do. That's why I said it's not for the faint of heart, just because it's kind of scary to read about that, because you might not think about that in the moment when you're tagging your location when you post a story, but maybe you should. If you're into the type of books that could be realistic, or they're written so well that it's as if it happened or it's going to happen, then this would be the one for you to pick up. The next book is Delicate Condition. Why is that so hard for me to say? Delicate Condition. It's by Danielle Valentine, and this is a psychological thriller, horror. Just because I'm saying the word horror, do not let that scare you. I used to be really scared of horror novels just because I do not like those types of films. I don't like seeing visuals like that, and therefore I thought, okay, I'm not gonna like those types of books either. Come to find out, it's actually not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. If anything, it's just kind of like reading a murder mystery in my opinion, at least the ones I've picked up. Just because the word horror is in it doesn't mean it's going to be super gruesome and graphic and gory. You don't wanna cross off a genre that you could potentially explore and like, just because you're a little afraid of the name. This is about an actress who is going through multiple rounds of IVF, and she keeps failing to get pregnant, and when she finally does, she miscarries, and she still continues to have symptoms of being pregnant and believes she actually is pregnant, but not with a human baby. Or maybe she is, or maybe she's not. Right off the bat, the first page of this book, you are going to be like, what the f? So far, super good book. I'm not done with it yet, but it is definitely a good one. It's compared to Rosemary's Baby. So if you've seen that, you know what you're getting yourself into. The next book is In the Woods by Tana French. And she has multiple books that are part of the Dublin Murder Squad series. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. But this one specifically is very much a suspense, crime mystery thriller. Just imagine that you are a part of an investigation and you're trying to solve a murder. That's really what it is, because it's from the point of view of a cop and he's a part of a murder that is trying to be solved. So this is about a pair of Irish detectives and their investigation of the murder of a 12-year-old girl. Definitely check out the trigger warnings for this book. I really loved the dynamic between the two detectives and I just loved their characters. At some points I was laughing at the way that they played good cop, bad cop. It just really gives you a very realistic approach. The next book is The Silent Patient by Alex McKillides, and this is one of my favorite books of all time. In fact, a lot of these books are on my favorites lists. That's saying something. This is a psychological horror thriller about a therapist named Theo who is obsessed with uncovering the motive behind a woman murdering her husband and never speaking again after the situation happened. So she murdered her husband and she hasn't said a word since, which is why it's called The Silent Patient. He's convinced he can get her to talk and to recall her memories. And so that's what he does. I don't want to ruin it, but this book is so good. I've never read a book like it since, and one of my favorite books. You just gotta read it. The next book is Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. This is the book that scarred me for quite some time. I'm going to say read the trigger warnings. It's not like it's gory or anything. It's just what it's talking about is just awful. And the plot itself is really, really good, but the basis of what it's surrounding is just awful, and that's all I can really say. But I know some people are going to really, really like this book. It does have good ratings. It's just the one main thing really unsettled me and kind of scarred me reading it, and I should have just never read it, but it has to go on the list. I warned you in advance. So this book is about Laurel, and her daughter disappeared a decade prior to where the book starts, and she's still trying to cope with the loss of her child because nothing has ever turned up in the investigation. The cops have never found anything linking to what happened to her. If she ran away, they've found nothing. So she is still very much hoping she could potentially be out there somewhere and she might turn up one day. So while she's trying to put her life back together, she ends up in an unexpected romance with a man named Floyd. And she ends up meeting his daughter, who looks almost identical to her daughter. And that's when pieces of the puzzle start coming together. It is so messed up. So just read the trigger warnings. There's this website you can go to where it really goes through all of the different things they may touch up on in the book without actually saying it. So I recommend finding that site. There's a couple of them. If you just Google it, you'll find it. But I recommend going to that just in case, because I don't want you to be scarred by anything like I was, because I need therapy after that, you know? The next book is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Man, that's a long title. It's by Grady Hendrix. This is a book that follows Patricia, who is living in Charleston, and she joins a book club with a bunch of other mothers, and they read books, but they also gossip. And when someone new moves in, which happens to be the neighbor, Patricia, they start gossiping about him. When children start to go missing in the town, Patricia begins to suspect that the stranger has something to do with it because it's the only new person there. It's very clear from the title what this book is about, so I'm not really giving anything away by saying vampire. This book felt like reading 5 years of events. It went on for so long. It's not even that long of a book, but it felt like it went on forever because you read so much. You read before things happened, and then like during, and then way after things happened, like skip too far in the future and still acting like the things in the past didn't happen. I don't know. The way it was written was really interesting. The timeline was just insane. It was almost like a lifetime to me reading it. Yeah, this was a really good one, and I love the fact that it's surrounding vampires because I love vampire books. Now we are moving on into some YA horror novels, and I love YA horror novels because I know reading it, it's not gonna be too bad. It's not gonna scar me. Not saying the adult ones did, but just on the off chance, It could. I know YA is not gonna do that. I also find that these are just so much more enjoyable. I don't know why. I mean, it depends. Maybe I'm just really immature. I don't know. I just really like them. That's all I can say. So the first YA horror novel is actually a series, and it's the Asylum series by Madeleine Roux. And there is the first one, which is Asylum. There is Sanctum, Catacomb, and there's also many other books in this series, and I don't know those ones. So I'm just talking about these 3 main ones, but I'm sure they're all good. I think this is a New York Times best-selling series. So this book follows Dan Crawford, who is attending a summer school college program. It's like a college prep program, and the dorms that he is staying at happen to be a sanitarium. So of course, being 16 years old and being very interested in getting scared and freaked out, he makes some friends and they decide to sneak around and do a bit more digging than they should, sneaking into places they shouldn't, and they just end up finding out way too much. And there was a lot of moments where I felt like me as a 16-year-old would just never do that. But you know, sometimes fictional characters are just so brave that I can't understand it, but they just are. I thought this book was really, really good. It's very much a dark academia book as well, because they're on the school grounds and he makes friends with like these 2 other students who are kind of weird and they're into weird things. And yeah, it's very much a DA book in my opinion. I will be recommending this book in a future DA video. I actually did start reading Catacomb, which is the 3rd book of the series, and I didn't realize it was the 3rd book until after I started reading it. So I need to go back and read the 2nd book. The next book is Frightmares by Eva V. Gibson. This book is a YA horror that follows Dave, who is working at a haunted house in Orlando, Florida. And he wants to work at Disney, but he's trying to get more experience. So he's working as a scare actor in a haunted house. And it's not even at a theme park. It's just like a tourist attraction. But one night while he is working, he discovers the dead body of one of his coworkers while he's in the maze and while people are walking through. And what scares me the most is the fact that he was trying to get help in the maze, but everyone thought it was a part of the act, so no one did anything and people were like laughing. And they were like, wow, this guy's a really good actor, but he wasn't acting. That's like my biggest fear when it comes around Halloween and I go to all these haunted houses. This one was a really, really fun time. I could tell you more, but I don't want to spoil the book for you. I just recommend reading it. And I talked about The Lost Village by Camilla Sten in my TBR, but guess what? I already read it. It was really creepy. It reminded me of Chernobyl, the movie. If you've ever seen that movie, it was very similar to that. They end up going to Chernobyl. They end up getting like trapped there and they're sleeping out in a van and they don't know how to get back and they can't get in touch with anyone. And it was very much that sort of vibe. And they start feeling like someone is there in Chernobyl with them, and someone is. So if you're a fan of that eerie feeling, like someone's looking over your shoulder or someone's watching you from outside your window, this is the book that you want to read. I didn't even say what this was about. I'm just like rambling on. Okay, so this is a Swedish book. So it is translated. And this follows a filmmaker named Alice who gathers a group of her friends to help her film a documentary in this village where 900 people went missing. They never found them. All they found was a newborn baby and 1 person dead. And other than that, 900 people disappeared without a trace. So this has been an unsolved mystery for a very long time, and she's always had high interest in it because her grandmother was involved. Therefore, she wants to film a documentary. So they end up going to this village with all of their filming equipment, and they're gonna stay in the village. Setting, amazing, right? This was definitely a creepy one. The next book is The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters, and this is a horror ghost story. This is set post-World War I, and this follows Dr. Faraday, who goes out to the Hall of Hundreds, which is this old country manor that his mom used to work at when he was little. And so he has sort of a connection to this place to begin with, but after he ends up going there and treating one of the members of the family who resides there, he ends up becoming like more attached to this manor in a way I can't really explain. You just got to read it. And as he's treating this patient just seems like they are insane. They're hearing voices. They believe that the voices are of someone that is like a ghost almost. But Dr. Faraday doesn't believe in ghosts, and he thinks he's crazy. He ends up sending him away to an insane asylum. He thinks that's what's best, but when he leaves, things still continue to happen in the house, and he still insists that it is not a ghost, because ghosts aren't real. And if I say anything else, it's just gonna ruin it. You're gonna experience a lot of different hauntings in this old Gothic manor, which is the perfect setting for a scary horror novel. The next book is Her Little Flowers by Shannon Morgan, and this is a Gothic horror ghost story. And it's about Francine, who lives in a haunted house. She quite literally sees ghosts every single day, and it does not faze her. She'll be having coffee and she just waves to the ghost right there. But the way that it's described is not in a cheesy Casper the Ghost way. It's described in a more realistic way, as if she's seeing them in like the last thing they died in, and they don't know why she sees them. They're just kind of there and then they disappear. This book actually might be an adult book. I looked it up and I couldn't find it. So it could be YA, it could be adult. When her sister ends up coming to town to visit, she finds out some life-changing information that changes the way she views the ghosts that she continues to see through her life. And all of these unanswered questions come to surface, and I can't say anything more without ruining the book. But that's the gist of it. So if you're a fan of a horror ghost story and you really are just craving the vibes of a haunted house setting, I need to stop saying this is the book for you, because it's just like, this is the book for you. How many times can I say that in one video? The next book is The Mary Shelley Club. And this is by Goldie Madolfsky. And it's funny because I still haven't read Frankenstein yet. But I do know more about Mary Shelley now that I've read this book, which is awesome. I know how she wrote Frankenstein, and it's a super cool story, but we'll save that for another video. Google it though. So this book follows 16-year-old Rachel, who is a survivor of a home invasion, and after it happens, she ends up relocating to a new city and going to a new school. So while she's at this new school, she has no friends, and she gets invited to some party, and this elaborate prank is pulled and she gets blamed for it. And in getting blamed for it, she is invited to the Mary Shelley Club. And if you're into secret societies, it doesn't matter what the club is or what they do, you just want to be a part of one. Therefore, you join. But after she joins, she ends up finding out that the whole point of the club is to come up with the scariest pranks, things that they have seen in horror films, to recreate them in real life to evoke fear within people. Then the pranks end up escalating beyond return, as you might have guessed. Do you remember the book Black Chalk that I talked about, that I just talked so much crap on because I was very disappointed in how the pranks went? Okay, this is kind of like the better version of that book. So if you're into dark academia and you wish that Black Chalk was a little better and you wanted more from that, then read this one, because this is everything that you wanted Black Chalk to be, except it's horror. I'm almost out of water. Yeah, I had water in this. The next book is Nightfall by Jake Halpern and Peter Kujawinski. And this book was very unique. It's like nothing I've ever read before. I think it was very interesting. Those authors really came up with something so creative. You just gotta read it. So this story is about an island where the sun rises and the sun sets for, I totally meant to say 14 years here at a time. So that means when the sun starts to set, everyone has to pack up and leave the island, because the tide ends up getting pulled out hundreds of miles and the entire island freezes over. I don't know what planet this is. So the story starts with a family packing up their house, getting it prepped to leave the island. And as they're helping their parents pack up, they start doing these very odd things, these very ritualistic things. Their parents are like, make sure the lock is done like this, and clean the house, make it super spotless, line up stuff like this. But it was just kind of weird. And the kids were like, why are we doing this? We're leaving the island, no one's gonna be here. As it starts getting darker, they realize their friend is missing. Well, they are the only ones that know where their friend is because their friend is at this secret hideout spot that they would go to. So they decide they're gonna go retrieve their friend before the boats leave. Now there's only one boat that comes to get everyone to take them to the place where their son. And once the boat's gone, you're stuck there and you're gonna die. It's guaranteed you're gonna die. So they decide to go find their friend, risking it all. I mean, what are you gonna do? It gets really creepy. Okay. And it's very fast paced. I think it's so interesting though. The story in general, just super interesting. And I think you're gonna love it. It's the perfect book to read around this time of year too. It's quite different from all the other books that I'm mentioning on this list, but it's a really good one. I'm officially out of water and I think I'm just gonna hold this because I like having something in my hand. It gives me something to do while I'm talking about books. Maybe I should hold a book. Is that weird that I'm just like holding a book, not talking about this book? Okay. Now moving in to another interesting read, which Goodreads says this is considered horror. This book is called Leave the World Behind. This is another very interesting, weird, creative story. I really liked this book. The reason I liked this book might be the reason you hate this book. It really gets you thinking. That's all I have to say. Okay. This is about a family that goes on vacation to Long Island and they rent out this really luxurious home, this Airbnb. And one night they end up getting a knock on the door from people claiming to be the owners of the Airbnb saying that there's a power outage in New York, there's no service, they can't get in touch with anyone, they can't go home to Manhattan. They thought it would be easier to just maybe ask if they could stay at the Airbnb till power is up and running because they don't know what's going on. So they end up letting them in, although they're kind of sketched out. They're like, are these strangers? Are we gonna get killed? They let them in, and as the story continues, just weird things start to happen. And it's not going to be weird in the way that you think it's weird. It's weird in the way of, oh my gosh, the world is ending. Like if this actually happened, you would really be freaking out. So I liked this because it was more of a realistic take on things. I loved this book. I thought it was so good. Like I said, you might not like it, but you might love it though, you know? So on the off chance you love it, had to recommend it. And with that, we have Verity by Colleen Hoover. I feel like I put all the books together that just have these really creative, unique storylines. So this is another one of those. This is the type of book that will get you thinking. It will leave you thinking for weeks. You're gonna have to go back and reread it. That's kind of how I felt about Leave the World Behind as well. Very unique storylines that make you think, like you really have to think about it. So Verity is about an author named Lowen who ends up getting a job to finish a book series for a famous author named Verity. But in order to complete the remaining novels in this series, she actually is asked to move into the house of Verity because she needs to go through all of her private notes in her office and all of her notes about the books pretty much to try to figure out how to write them because she does not know. And the reason she has to do this is because Verity was in an accident and she can't talk. So she ends up moving into the house with Verity there, Verity's very hot husband, and she's going through all of her personal stuff and ends up coming across something she shouldn't. So this book, I need to reread it again. It's so good. This was one of my favorite books. Did I read this last year? I may have read this last year. I can't remember, but it's one of my favorite books I've ever read. It is incredible. I love Colleen Hoover. It was my first book by her. And ever since I've read this book, I've read a lot of her books now, and man, I just love her writing so much, but this one especially, incredible. The next book is The Horror Hotel by Victoria Fulton and Faith McLaren. So this book is about a group of YouTubers go to this hotel in downtown LA where a bunch of murders have happened, and they're going there to film after dark to try to capture something paranormal and post it to their YouTube. And the way that this hotel is described is like the Cecil Hotel, which is also in downtown LA. And they actually mention the Cecil Hotel in this book. So I think that was kind of like an ode, as if maybe that was the inspiration behind this story. But it's not just YouTubers going to capture YouTube video. There are people that are able to see ghosts and are able to see how people died which adds to that horror element in the story because you get to see someone reliving people's deaths consistently because there has been so many deaths within that hotel, and it's very descriptive and unsettling and creepy. This definitely isn't the type of book you want to read at night just because there are so many dead people. Anyways, while they end up filming there, they start to realize, wow, maybe we shouldn't have come to this hotel where a bunch of murders have taken place because there might still be a murderer out there that comes to this hotel. And we are here looking for a story, and maybe we are the story. I don't know why that sounded so dramatic. It didn't need to be that dramatic, but it was. But the reason I picked this book up initially is just because of the book cover. I think the book cover is absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's so well done. The colors, everything about it, amazing. And it really just drew me in, so I had to read it. In fact, most of the horror books or spooky books I pick up in general are normally based off of the cover. If the cover doesn't scare me or make me happy, I don't know. I probably won't want to read it. The next book is The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. So this book is a thriller horror, and it's about Parker, who is this overconfident psychiatrist who is convinced that he can diagnose this undiagnosable patient who has been there for a super long time. He's been there like his entire life, and he's never left. So he convinces his higher-ups to let him go in and try to diagnose this guy. But the reason they don't want him to go in and they don't let anyone go in and go near him anymore is because they have in the past, and people have committed suicide after. So they're like, what's going on in these meetings? What is causing these people to do this after they meet with this guy? So he finally ends up meeting the patient and talking with him, and he realizes this patient is totally normal. That's when it gets weird. I know a few of you mentioned that you read this book, so I'm happy you guys read it, but it is quite a twist. It's not what I was expecting when I was reading it. I thought I was reading something that sounds like what it is, and it's not what it sounds like. Does that make sense? Like I said, I'm somehow grouping all of the really unique storylines together in this list unintentionally, but that's just what happened. The next book is Just Like Mother by Anne Hetzel, and I know I am mentioning a few books that are on my autumn recommendation list as well, but these are horror, so they're on this list too. So this book is about Maeve, who ends up escaping a cult at a young age, and she leaves her cousin behind. It's been about 2 decades since she escaped. She's living, she's back to normal, she's doing okay, but then her cousin comes back into her life. Her cousin's doing amazing. She's a business owner. She's thriving. They're now hanging out again. They're friends. They're close. She's super close with all of her friends. She feels complete having her cousin back in her life. But then her cousin introduces her to this fake baby project she's working on. And it's a fake baby that is for grieving parents or for parents that are preparing for a child. But it ends up becoming much more sinister as it goes along. And she starts to realize, okay, maybe my cousin doesn't want me back in her life for the reason I thought. That's all I'm gonna say. This is a weird, weird book. And if you like cults, then you'll like this one. You're gonna like this book, this cult too. I don't know what to say. This is one of those books where you're going to go, what the heck is going on? What is happening? You know, if you want that reaction, then you're gonna wanna read this one. Can't think of any better line to say to convince you to read a book. Read it because you should. You know what? You don't have to read it, but you're going to. Just read it. I don't know. That's all I got for now. Okay, next book. The next book is 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. So this is a mystery thriller horror novel, and it's about a bunch of friends that end up going on a road trip for spring break in an RV, and their RV ends up breaking down in the middle of nowhere. They have no service. There's no one around to help, and when they get out to inspect the RV, they realize all of their tires have been shot out. That's when you realize this is intentional. Someone wants us to be here. Again, another story on this list that just has a really interesting, unique plot like nothing I've ever read before. It's not just your basic kids stranded in the woods, hills have eyes. It's not like that. No, there's so much more to this story. Besides it freaking me out, I really loved the problem-solving skills that the kids had to come up with when they were in this situation. Like some of the things that they thought of, I was like, would I have thought of that? Probably not. They were very smart. They were smart kids. Don't you love when you read a story that's scary and the protagonist isn't dumb? I love it. Speaking of really dumb protagonists, we have Survive the Night by Riley Sager, with the dumbest protagonist of all. And I think she was written this way on purpose. This is a book set in 1991 where a girl decides to take a ride with a complete stranger just 2 months after her best friend was murdered by a serial killer. The serial killer's on the loose. Don't you think they might know who you are? Like you were her best friend? I don't know. So, very dumb protagonist. But when you have a protagonist that's just stupid, it kind of puts you in those really scary situations and you just go, what are you doing? Why? Sort of like that. And it's a little bit, it's kind of fun. And we can all learn from these people, these fictional characters. We can learn what not to do ever. Although it's kind of frustrating reading about dumb protagonists, I think that it was still a good book and it was scary and it freaked me out. The next book is The Island by Natasha Preston. I liked the book, but you'll just have to read it. I wanted to read this book originally because of the cover. I read the synopsis. I was like, yeah, a spooky theme park, all for it. So this book is about a bunch of influencers that get invited to this island theme park resort to kind of review it, post about it, spread the word about it on their socials to try to get people to come and stay. I thought it was a really good concept because it's kind of realistic at this day and age, except where is this island theme park? I want to go. I don't want what happened to happen, but I want to go if it's safe. So of course they end up going to this amazing resort theme park and everything goes wrong. This is a very fast-paced book. I feel like there was never a moment when they were just chilling. There was always something happening, lots of running around. If you're a fan of fast-paced and you get bored easily, I don't think this will bore you at all. But you might not like it, and I'm not gonna say why. You have to read it to find out. That's on you. And I'm not gonna say I didn't like it, because I did like it up to a certain point, but this isn't a book review video. This is just recommending you books to read that might freak you out or that will 100% freak you out. So I'll leave this, to your own discretion. The next book is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. We've got a lot of Riley Sager books. Sit down, get ready. So this book is about a neighbor who ends up befriending her neighbor who lives at the house across the lake. And then one day her neighbor suddenly goes missing and she thinks that her husband murdered her and she starts investigating it. This is one of those stories that it's not what it seems. Lots of mixed reviews on this book. I thought it was really good. I thought it was super unique. And it's the perfect spooky horror thriller book. And I mean, it's really good for Halloween, that's for sure. The next book is Final Girls, again, by Riley Sager. 10 years ago, college student Quincy ends up going on vacation with 5 of her friends and ends up coming back alone because all of her friends have been murdered. Because of her being a survivor of such an awful situation, she becomes a part of this club. It's not like an actual club. It's like a club the media created, and it's called the Final Girls. And this club just consists of other women who have been in similar situations who have survived. So they all know about each other because of the press. When one of the final girls ends up committing suicide, Quincy is convinced that there's no way this girl did that because she would have never done that. And she believes that she has been framed to make it seem like she committed suicide when she actually didn't and she was killed. So she starts investigating it with another girl who was a part of the Final Girls Club to try to see what actually happened. This is definitely a horror novel though, because when it goes into describing how her friends got murdered, it reminds me of some documentaries that I have watched. Like very accurately reminds me of factual events that have taken place. So would recommend reading the trigger warnings because it's disturbing. The next book by Riley Sager as well is The Last Time I Lied. This is about Emma who went to summer camp 15 years ago, and one night her friends ended up leaving the cabin and never coming back. But now Emma is an artist and she's become quite popular, and she ends up getting contacted by the new owner of this summer camp that she went to as a kid, and they they ask her to come and teach as a art counselor at the camp. And they put her in the old cabin where she was when her friends went missing, and it starts like bringing up memories, and she starts uncovering secrets and trying to figure out what happened to her friends. Being in the woods in a cabin by yourself, alone, in the setting of where your friends disappeared, no. The next book is Lock Every Door by 𝚌𝚘𝚎. And the next two books I'm going to mention by him are my favorites of the bunch, especially Home Before Dark. That's my absolute favorite. It gave me literal chills on my skin. But let's talk about Lock Every Door. So Lock Every Door is about Jules, who takes on the role of an apartment sitter. Not only does she get to live in apartment sit, this luxurious apartment, but she's also getting paid lots of money to do it. In Manhattan, kind of a red flag right off the bat. Like, I would be concerned. So after she ends up moving in, she finds out there's all these stipulations that go into living at the apartment. She can't have people over ever. She can't have people over ever. I don't know, that's just weird. She can't leave past a certain time. Like, she has to be there every single night, and she has to sleep in the apartment. Does the apartment know you're there? Everything's weird. That's the only word I can think of at the moment to describe it. And she's not allowed to talk to any of the residents. But while she's living there, she ends up finding out that the predecessor of her job disappeared prior to her arriving, and that's why she was hired. So she starts doing some research, trying to figure out what happened to this girl. And that's where everything goes downhill. Look, if you were ever offered a deal to live in Manhattan for free and get paid for it, just don't do it. It's just bad all around. Which takes me to White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson, where a similar situation happens. So this book is about Mari, whose mother gets offered a job in Cedarville, California, which is a really small town, and it's like the perfect setting for a scary book to happen. But she gets offered a job, and to take on this job, she also gets a free, brand new, renovated house. So they end up moving to Cedarville, California, and they realize that they are the only nice house on this street that is just surrounded by dilapidated houses. But of course, that's not the only thing that's weird. Weird things begin to happen after they move in, like lights turning on, bed bugs. Bed bugs. I will never look at bed bugs the same after reading this book. Jeez Louise. Now moving on to the last 𝚌𝚘𝚎 book, because I kind of hopped around there just because those other two had very similar plot lines. But my favorite 𝚌𝚘𝚎 book of the bunch is Home Before Dark. Hands down my favorite. When Maggie ends up inheriting Baneberry Hall after her father's death, she decides she wants to go back and renovate and sell the place that her family left when she was a child because of how haunted it was. It was so haunted to the point that her father ended up writing a book about this haunted house, and that is why they left. But she does not believe in ghosts, and she doesn't recall any of the things that he mentioned in that book. So when she goes back to renovate it, weird things, of course, start happening. I mean, that's just what you have to expect. But of all the books on this list, this one freaked me out the most, and I got straight chills from it. I felt like something was in the house, and I could only read it during the daytime. This one is the scariest by far for me. I don't know why that is. It just was. Maybe it's the way it was written. I don't know. The next book is Silver Eyes by Scott Cawthon and Kira Breed Risley. This is based off of the video game Five Nights at Freddy's, so this was written after the video game came out. I've only read the first two books. I might read the third, but to me, it starts to get a little more on the paranormal side of things, as the first book felt very realistic, which is why it's my favorite, but I will also recommend the second book of the series as well, which is The Twisted Ones. So this book is about Charlie, who ends up going back to her hometown of Hurricane, Utah, a decade after the murders that happened at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And she ends up reuniting with all of her friends, and they decide to go find Freddy's and sneak into it. And it's inside of an abandoned mall, and Freddy's ends up being entirely intact when they go into it. But of course, it's not all that it seems. This book is so good though. Like I said, it's realistic, which is why it's really freaky. And the second one to me ends up going more on the paranormal side. But I will tell you what the second one is about too. But to me, the first one is just like prime. It is so good. The second book of the series, The Twisted Ones, happens a year after the first book, and murders end up taking place once again, which leads her back to Freddy's. So I'm not going to say too much about this book because you really need to read the first one, and I don't want to give away the entire story because it might give away the first book. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I would, if you're going to read any of them, the first book is my favorite. I mean, I've only read two, but it's my favorite. Also, if you've ever been to Hurricane, Utah, or if you know that city, it is just the perfect setting for a horror book to take place. Like, it's creepy. It's not creepy, like it's okay. It's just one of those towns where something like this would happen. I don't know how I can say that it's one of those towns, but it is. The next three books are a part of a series, and it's called One of Us is Lying. I love this series so much. I thought this series was so good. All three books for me were just winners. And not to mention, Karen McManus has a bunch of books that all have a very similar theme, and I like all of them, but I'm just going to talk about three of them. So One of Us is Lying is by Karen M. McManus, and this is a YA mystery thriller horror. This book is about 5 students that enter detention and 1 ends up dead, meaning the 4 remaining students end up being suspects in a murder. Now, they all claim they're innocent, but what the police don't know is that Simon had a gossip column, a gossip blog, where he was about to release a bunch of information on the students that didn't die right before he ended up dying in detention. So to try to prove their innocence, they end up getting together and kind of becoming friends, sort of testing each other, seeing if someone's lying, trying to see if that person did it, that person did it, and if not, trying to figure out who is trying to frame all 4 of them, and why, and who, of course, killed Simon. So the next book, One of Us is Next, happens a year after, and it's kind of a continuation of the first story, and someone comes back claiming to be Simon, who we know now is dead, and starts playing a very sinister game of truth or dare with the 4 students that survived. Pretty much if they don't do the dares, bad things happen. And One of Us is Back is pretty much, again, a continuation and sort of the same story of the second one, just slightly different. But I can say that all of these books are so good. I really, really loved this series. I loved this series almost as much as the next one I'm going to mention. So the next series I'm going to mention is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And I know I talk about this series all the time, but it's one of my favorite series of all time. So that's why I talk about it so much. This is by Holly Jackson. This story is about Pippa Fitzamobi, who decides for her senior project, she is going to reopen a case that happened in her town 5 years prior because she believes the person who was convicted of murder actually didn't do it because she grew up in the town and she thinks they were wrong. So she ends up opening the case again and starts interviewing everyone. So this book takes place in the form of text messages, emails, phone calls, interviews, and it's just insane. It's such a good book. But that takes me to the second book because they all get so much better. Each book just gets so much better, and I really hope there's a 4th one. The second book of the series is Good Girl, Bad Blood, and I'm not gonna say too much because I don't want to ruin the first one by giving away the synopsis right now. But it's just about Pippa realizing her friend has gone missing and the police won't do anything about it, so she decides to find him herself. And the last book of the series is As Good as Dead, and this is my absolute favorite book of the series, but in order for it to be your favorite too, you have to read the 2 prior novels because it just will not affect you the same way if you just dive right into the last book. You know what I'm saying? You really have to form that emotional connection with a fictional character that you don't know in order to have those feelings. So the 3rd book, don't want to ruin it, but you just have to trust me on this. It's incredible. One of the best books I've ever read. To this day, messes me up in the best way possible thinking about it, and I just love Pippa so much. If you've seen me talk about this book before, you know I always get like teary-eyed. It's not in like a sad way. It's just, I want the best for her, you know, and I just feel so bad. And I can't explain it, but I'm telling you, you have to read it. You have to trust my emotions are real and read it, okay? I keep mentioning this book so much. I can't recall one person that's actually commented saying like, oh, I've read it. So I'm just waiting. I'm mentioning this book until someone replies saying they've read As Good as Dead and they've read the series and they understand why I'm so emotional over the last book. And the last book on this list, which you're probably gonna know, it's Coraline by Neil Gaiman, and it's a middle grade horror fantasy. This is about Coraline Jones, who moves to a new city, to a new home, and ends up finding a parallel world inside of her home, consisting of everything she currently has, but 1,000 times better, but also more sinister. I really hope that Neil ends up writing an updated version to this book, maybe a new story of someone else in the home, because I just thought this story was so incredible. It's too short, and I wish it was longer, and can we just somehow convince him to make an adult, longer version of this? Because technically this is a novella, which is okay. It's amazing no matter how short it is in length. Well, anyways, that is all of my horror, spooky, suspenseful book recommendations. I hope you guys like the books I mentioned. Hopefully I mentioned some new ones that you haven't heard of and it entices you to maybe delve into some horror. All I can say is with reading anything that has death in it of some sort, read the trigger warnings just in case. And if you have any recommendations you would like to share, comment them below, share them with me, share them with everyone here. I'm especially looking for more adult horror. So if you have any good ones that you think I would enjoy, let me know what they are, please. Well, that is it. I've taken so much of your time for the day. I'm sorry, but thank you for being here. And I will see you guys in the next one. Okay. Bye.